It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm glad to be here this morning with you. Appreciate those of you who are riding with us on our website. If you're not, you can start anytime. You can join us by going to americasvoicenow.org. We stream the show live, both audio and video there. If you'd like to catch it, I know I have a face made for radio, but sometimes the medium of video is helpful. And so you're certainly welcome to join us at any time utilizing that method, and we'd be happy to have you. For those of you that catch us on Patriot FB, glad to have you folks with us this morning. And for those of you on Big Country 99 and our other media outlets, glad to have you folks here. So we're going to talk about a few different things this morning. Yesterday, I went to a meeting with the Ozark Riverways, which is a National Park Service project that the National Park Service has been trying to institute a brand new, quote-unquote, 20-year plan, which they've been working on for the last 8. Talk about government inefficiency, right? And basically, they want to take this block of rivers, which they obtained via the false choice and coercion at the point of a gun many years ago from the state. They obtained it because they threatened that if they didn't turn the property over to the federal government, that the Army Corps of Engineers was going to build dams there and dam up the whole river and, knock a whole bunch of landowners out and so forth and so on. So the state capitulated and gave the property to the federal government, and since then they've been acting like tyrants. Now they've been working for the last 8 years on this new 20-year plan. Imagine that, working 8 years on a plan that's going to last for the next 20. I mean, anyway, there's no empirical science. There's the produce of this 8-year study, which is a joke, is 535 pages. There's nothing in it but gray. There is no definitive plan of any kind, just a lot of vague references and a lot of nonsensical information that they've gathered and pulled from various sources. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Yesterday, I went to a meeting up in Van Buren. It's the third of 4 meetings. They tried to pull a Delphi technique on us, or at least a modified variant of the Delphi technique. And essentially, they had these stations that instead of breaking us up into groups and sitting us at tables and utilizing that as the methodology, they had these indoctrination stations. Basically, you went to the indoctrination station, and there was an NPS representative there, and they would give you all of the reasons why we should get down on our knees, raise our hands, and allow the cuffs to be placed on so that they could usurp our property further and limit access. The key operative word of every discussion they have is restriction, restricted access to this, restricting motors, closing roads, restricting access into the park and pathways, and all these different various methods. And so, in the first meeting, which was held in Eminence, there were about 400 concerned citizens who came out. And in the second meeting, there were about 200. That one was held in Salem. And in this meeting last night, the estimate was about 300, and that was the park's numbers, not mine. And then there's a meeting tonight in Kirkwood. If any of you can make it, if you're up in the St. Louis area and you'd like to attend this meeting, I would strongly encourage you to do so. I would like to see a vast showing of concerned people to come up there and basically say, Washington, the time has come for you to go home. Leave our rivers alone. Get out. We don't want you here, and you're not doing us any favors by being here. Now, I've asked Mike Slack, who is the one of the leaders of the Property Rights Coalition down in the Mammoth Spring area and Thayer area, to call in this morning and to kind of give us an update on that. I'm going to try to make Kirkwood tonight. I know that's a tall order for me because it's a long way away, and I'll have to, I have to be up at early in the morning to do the show. And if I do make it there, I may end up doing a best of or a repeat show tomorrow, just because, well, frankly, there's a limit to how much I can, do. But one of the things that we want to make clear to the federal government here is, one, they're really not welcome here. We don't really want them here in our backyard. They're not welcome, and we want the property turned back over to the state of Missouri to be maintained and handled and controlled, not by the federal government, but by the State Conservation Division. And that would put us back in a position of control over our rivers. I'm just going to give you one really egregious example of their management. A while back, there's a group that was there last night. It's a not-for-profit organization, and they're an environmentally friendly group where they're trying to keep the river clean. And so they offered to put together a team of their membership to go out and essentially clean the river. So what they do is they assign segments of the river to individuals, and these guys and girls, they go out there on rafts and in boats, and they swim, and they pick up trash along the river if there's anything that's bottles and cans from people who come from other areas, and basically float down the river and use it as an opportunity to get naked and drunk and stupid. And so during the course of that, they had to apply to the national government for a permit to accomplish this at the unbelievable and ridiculously arrogant price of $300 to do a voluntary effort that the federal government itself won't do. They declare that they're in control of the property, but yet they won't clean it. And when the citizens who live here want to clean it for our own benefit, we're charged $300 for a permit to clean our own property. I mean, how ridiculous is that? And that's only one of the literally thousands of egregious examples. They've barred individuals from being able to use it, or churches from using it for baptisms. Really? Baptisms? Yeah. Hey, Mike, are you with us?
I'm with you, Mike.
Well, thank you very much for taking...
What a dog and pony show last night.
Oh, my. I mean, stunning. Basically, what we ended up with was a modified variant of the Delphi technique. Those of you who aren't familiar with it, go look it up. It's spelled Delphi, D-E-L-P-H-I, D like Delta. The Delphi technique enables government to draw a predefined public consensus that's always in line with their agenda, and they use it as a way to come back later on and say, see, the public is in agreement with us. And so that was one of the principles of last night's meeting. Mike, what was your thoughts on the speakers who got up and spoke? Including yourself, by the way, which I think you did a fine job.
Thank you, Mike. Well, we had, 15 speakers. 2 of them were in favor of the wilderness area. And by the way, the speaking was supposedly only allowed to address the wilderness area they're proposing, not the 20-year plan. Basically, it's a foregone conclusion. The Park Service has a plan they want.
Right.
They refer to it and push it constantly, whereas the best choice that we are offered by them is simply status quo, no change.
Yeah.
And everyone else there wanted that, leading to giving the land back to the state. But the 2 speakers who were there, one of them went on past her 3 minutes, probably 8 minutes long.
Yep.
I noticed the facilitator from the Park Service, who came from Denver, by the way, did not interrupt her. Several of us actually decided to be a little rude and yell because we stuck to our 3 minutes or less. She went way over.
Yeah. Well, at one point he was running around flapping his hands like he really didn't know how to keep the situation in control. And interestingly, by the way, you notice he introduced himself as a, quote, facilitator, which is exactly the term that is used for all of these Delphi technique meetings. The person is a facilitator, which is, intended to be a skilled manipulator of the public opinion. So, I noticed, Mike, when I brought out the term Delphi technique, he got all aflutter over there on the left side. I caught it out of the side of my eye, but when I announced to the public that this was a modified variant of the Delphi technique, boy, he was moving over there like he'd just gotten hit with an electric shock.
You made several of his colleagues squirm during the night also with your one-on-one talks. That was very amusing to watch.
That chief law enforcement officer there, he was wishing that we were somewhere out in the National Park Service area so that he could have had his way with me, because I'm telling you right now, he was so mad at me his ears were red.
Oh yeah. And but the 13 folks who spoke, you among them, and you brought the house down, everyone spoke from the heart. Everyone was for simply returning it to the state. More than one person said that we had had enough of the federal government interfering with our lives. And what do we have, 4 or 5 people say they simply did not trust the government?
Oh, yeah.
Or the Department of the Interior.
Well, when you read that plan...
Everyone there seems to trust them as much as the Indians do.
When you read that plan, Mike, the thing is nothing but a lot of smoke and mirrors and gray areas that's subject to later interpretation. And, of course, the later interpretation is whatever the whim of whatever the bureaucratic pencil neck determines is, their policy now, right? So, one of the things that
Mike, that's not incompetence. I've read it, and remember, I'm a writer. That's how I make my living, working with words. They have skillfully worked with words to be vague and obscure, allowing them to do almost anything they want in the future.
Right.
Should that be passed?
It's
a masterful job of subterfuge.
It's the twisting of language utilizing legalese, which can be redefined at a later date to incorporate almost anything. And, it was funny. I said to a couple of those guys, there was one guy there, and I said to him, as a member of the National Park Service, you work for an administrative agency, and you don't take an oath of office as a member, do you? And he said, no, I don't. And I said, so see, here what we have is an administrative agency that operates outside of constitutional authority, because Congress may have created you, but we didn't give Congress the permission to subdelegate our power of attorney to them, to you. And now you're telling me you don't take an oath, which means that we don't have any assurance that you're operating in a manner which would protect and defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and, I emphasize, domestic. Boy, I tell you what, he just looked at me in stunned silence. And then I said to him, what I think you should do is, I think if you were a true American who really honored an oath, which you may have taken if you did any military service, and I'm not asking, then what you should do is quit your job and go find an alternative job. He said, well, that's not going to happen. And I said, so exactly right. Here's what you're trying to tell me. And you may not be saying this, but this is what your actions tell me, which speak far louder than your words. You're willing to sacrifice our nation and accomplish your own personal task as long as you benefit personally. That was the end of that conversation. He didn't like that one bit.
He squirmed. I saw that.
The truth is, Mike...
Another thing to point out to people... Huh?
Go ahead.
I was just going to point out that this meeting last night was the first of the meetings where they actually had a public forum for people to speak.
Yeah, they've prohibited it in earlier ones.
Meeting in Salem. They did. I sent you a clip of a YouTube video. Bob Parker was in eminence, and he was talking to Mr. Black, the director, pointing that out, and a good one-on-one discussion where, frankly, Mr. Black is squirming. Bob did a great job. But they were trying to restrict us to discussing the wilderness area that no one wants, other than the two ladies who were there, who go over their time.
Right.
But it's a non-issue. It's an example of how Washington wastes our money. By tradition of more than 100 years since Teddy Roosevelt created the National Park Service, they cannot implement a plan like that without the approval of the member of Congress in whose district it is.
And he's already told them they can't have it.
Flatly told them, no, exactly.
So, I mean...
And one of his representatives was there last night to emphasize that he would fight it every step of the way. And the subcommittee that he sits on, the same one that had the field hearing in West Plains a few months ago on the Blueway,
yeah,
will respect... That's the way Congress operates. They will respect his wishes, and he is respecting ours in this case. And it's a non-issue. So why are we wasting money on
well,
it.
and
We're
then
wasting time.
and then to limit the comments only to that topic shows you that they're trying to funnel and misdirect the conversation and the public comment away from the real danger here, which is allowing these monsters to have unlimited access to a 20-year plan, which enables them to shut down roads, close horse trails, ban people from being able to, and restricting access from different areas of the river. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that entire scenic riverways area will become a police state microcosm.
Exactly. Tom Schulte, who represents Senator Roy Blunt, was there. He said that Senator Blunt will issue a statement on this in a few days after the last hearing in Kirkwood. I am expecting him to come out with our congressman, and our lieutenant governor has been pretty vocal on this, and all of our state representatives and state senators, to be for the no-action plan and returning it to the state. And we had several state representatives there last night. Now, the meeting in eminence, I understand absolutely every state representative and senator who is in the affected area was there. Last night we had Steve Cookson, Todd Richardson, Robert Ross. I believe that was it. But I want to really give credit to those guys because they had to drive from Jefferson City in the afternoon to get there. Mm-hmm. And they had to drive back to Jefferson City afterwards.
Right.
So they probably had very little sleep today. But there's a State of the State address by the governor they all have to be present for. So they went above and beyond last night, and I'm
glad to see that they're sticking with their guns on this issue, because the best outcome for the state of Missouri is for the federal government to return that property back to the state, allow the conservation department to be in control of it, and we can tell them all to go home. You know, I had one of them say to me last night, you know, the amount of money that we put into this area would be missing if we gave this property back to the state. In other words, you know what that reminded me of, Mike? It reminded me of an argument from a guy who abuses his wife, right? And she says, I'm leaving. And suddenly he changes his tune and tries to mollify the situation. And, well, you know, I really love you. And when she continues to insist that she's going to leave, he turns around and he says, but you can't make it on your own. You're never going to do it. You're not capable. You see, it's this old game of if you leave and you toss us out, you're never going to be able to financially afford to maintain the park. Well, with all due respect to the federal government, this park was under state control long before it was involved, in the federal government, and we did a fine job. In fact, the maintenance that the state has managed of it is far better and far cleaner than it is under the federal government. They have allowed areas to go completely unmaintained, and we don't really need them here, especially at the exorbitant cost that they apply, one, to the people who want to come here, and their staggering salaries. I mean, these are people that make $125,000 and $150,000 a year in an area where the average person makes $20,000 to $25,000. It's ridiculous.
And do you realize that they all get a 14% pay differential?
Yeah, for living here amongst the
The
peasantry.
Ozarks are expensive. Or maybe it's hazard pay for living amongst these hillbillies.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's just the whole
That's
thing
the
is an
attitude we get,
insult to the intelligence of the people that are here. And the truth is they obtained this by blackmail in the first place, by basically threatening to build a dam here that would eviscerate everyone's property rights if we didn't turn the property over to the federal government. And immediately upon turning it over, they lord it over us as if, we're lucky to be able to hunt on the king's land, so to speak.
That was during the Lyndon Johnson administration, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you realize, Mike, that of the meetings so far, 1,100 people so far have shown up, most in opposition to the Park Service and their plan.
Well, out of the 300 that were there out of the 300 plus that were there last night, Mike, there were only 4 that I counted that were in favor of it. And 2 of them one of them was a husband and wife team, and the other one was, I didn't know if that other woman was connected to somebody else there, but I think that they were, husband and wife teams.
Mother-daughter, I believe.
Mother-daughter and a husband and wife group. So, well, listen, Mike, thank you very much for the
one
update.
representative from Claire McCaskill.
Oh, there you go.
Mike. Take care.
Thanks, Mike, so much. Appreciate you. Okay, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk about a liberal warrior who is urging for the impeachment of Obama. Now, for the record, this guy is a liberal icon. His name is Nat Hentoff, and he's a writer. If you don't know who he is, he's claiming flat out that this is the most destructive president, the most destructive and dangerous president we've ever had. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop at number 2 Court Square in West Plains. They can be reached at 417-257-1776. They're a patriotic bunch over there. They carry cigars and tobacco, some exotics, as well as the regular, run-of-the-mill types of cigars. They carry pipes and accessories. Make sure that you visit them. And if you can't visit them, they can certainly ship to you, 417-257-1776. While you're there, you can slip into Wits End Classic Barbershop and get yourself a great haircut for $10. He also does hot lather shaves with the wet towel and the whole 9 yards. Great American patriot is Jason, and I think you'll be impressed with him. While you're there, if you have a legal issue, you can visit the law offices of Jason Henry. He's at number 10 Court Square. His phone number is 417-256-4100, and you can contact him if you've got any case, either state or federal, related to criminal issues. He does handle civil issues, including matrimonial, and also issues related to personal injury regarding vehicle accidents and the like. He's a very good attorney, and he's a patriot for America. And it's unusual in the sense that he can handle federal cases, because you have to be approved and qualified by a court and all of that nonsense. And so he specializes in federal firearms cases and state firearms cases. If you've got one of those and the powers that be are attempting to imprison you for being in possession of a weapon as a felon or something, make sure you give him a call. Also, see our friends over at Pizza Hut. They're on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, and they have a great lunch special, which I usually partake of on a fairly routine basis. You can go in there and get a salad, and they got an excellent salad bar. And then, of course, they've got pizza and pasta on another hot bar, and that's open from like 11 o'clock, I think, till 2 in the afternoon. While you're at it, make it a note on your calendar that on Tuesday night, that's family night, and kids under 12 eat free, so you can slip in there and get a fairly inexpensive meal for the entire family, and you'll usually meet some other good patriotic folks there. Any one of these places that you go to, please make sure that you go up to the manager or the owner and you say to them, "Hey, I just want to thank you for supporting America's Voice Now. I heard about your location on America's Voice Now, and I want to thank you for supporting that program because I enjoy it and it keeps me informed and educated." You can also see our friends over at the Battery Station. You can find them by going to batterystation.com. You can also reach them at 417-257-7799. They have a very, very broad selection, and a lot of it's not on their website. They ship all over the world, all over the country. They're one of the biggest distributors of batteries and flashlights and electronic gear like that. Make sure that you get a hold of them and tell Kevin or whoever answers the phone over there, "I heard about this on America's Voice Now, and I wanted to make sure I said thank you." We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the liberal icon who is urging for Obama's impeachment. We'll be right back. Oh, yeah. All right, we're back. See, when you catch us on radio, it's one of the best mediums in the United States to catch alternative media. And the reason I say that is because it doesn't cost you anything. There's no cable bill. There is no cost associated with radio at all. All you got to do is ride through an occasional commercial or two. And if you're catching us streaming on AVN, on americasvoicenow.org, or on Patriot Facebook, or any of these other types of areas and media that we use, You don't even have to listen to the commercials. I take the pain of that out for you. I want to thank the guys who are catching us on our website this morning. I see folks up there from Salon. Looks like that's somewhere up near Michigan or upper Ohio or something. Kissimmee, Florida, I see on there. A place called Humansville. I'm not even quite sure where that is, but I'm glad to have you. Thanks very much for joining with us. You know, we're gonna touch on a topic now about a liberal icon, a fellow by the name of Nat Hentoff, and you know, he is out and out, flat out calling Obama the most destructive and dangerous president we've ever had. Now, he's a writer for WorldNet Daily, but he didn't start there. He has a long, long history of being a liberal journalist who, for all intents and purposes, he is at this time and pointing out the fact that if we do not get this stopped, we are really, really in danger of losing our republic. He's actually worse than Richard Nixon, according to Nat Hentoff. And he's declaring that based on an unprecedented abuse of powers. He's calling him the most un-American president in the nation's history. And here's the deal. Hentoff is, got a long history of being a civil First Amendment expert, First Amendment rights expert, and an expert on civil rights, and he got his start back in the 60s and 70s, and he's been kind of looked at as the conscience of the civil libertarianism and liberalism movement for decades now. Here's a couple of the things he has to say. And he points specifically to the statement of Obama that was just made the other day. I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive action. Here's his comment to WorldNet Daily. Apparently, he doesn't give one damn about the separation of powers. Never before in our history has a president done these things. This is the worst state, I think, that the country has ever been in. Now, to hear someone who ordinarily would ally themselves with the progressive liberalism, liberal side of things, even though he's, a libertarian in a lot of his philosophies, to hear him talk about that and in that manner should really give pause to a lot of the folks out there who are liberal progressive in their stance. I mean, he's one of the foremost authorities on the Bill of Rights and the Supreme Court. That's been the focus of his study and his writing for years. He was a columnist and a staff writer with the Village Voice for 51 years. Guys, he started working for the Village Voice back in 1957. He didn't quit until 2008. And then he started putting his columns up on WorldNet Daily. Now, the Village Voice, if you're not familiar, is a pretty liberal organization. I mean, they make no bones about where they stand on these types of issues. And Hentoff has not exactly been, what you would term or consider to be a conservative. But he is very vocal about, about these issues at this stage, and he says he hasn't liked Obama from the start. Within a few months after he was elected, I wrote a column saying he was going to be the most destructive and dangerous president we've ever had. He says that people told him for years to stop being negative and to give Obama a chance. Here's his response. Well, we've given him a chance. I think I understated the case a little. I mean, in other words, this guy is a danger, an exigent, clear and present danger to our republic. And that's why he's saying it's time for an impeachment process. Here's what he had to say. He has no right, emphasis is his, not mine, to do these executive orders. He is in a position now where he figures he's going to do whatever he wants to do. He's the boss, and hardly anybody cares enough. Ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing the day-by-day, blow-by-blow action of a nation falling apart, of a nation descending into abject tyranny. And when you hear individuals like this coming out and saying that, there's no denying that this is off the charts behavior. That this is, excuse me, I'm still fighting this loss of voice. That this is behavior which is destructive of all of the principles under which our nation was designed and founded. He points out a number of the well-known examples of Obama changing and issuing laws with the stroke of a pen and a dictatorial mandate, including executive orders. Things like delaying the employer mandate in Obamacare, changing the types of the plans that are available under Obamacare, ensuring that abortions would be covered under Obamacare, which he promised before it was passed that would not happen, enacting key provisions of the failed DREAM Act to halt deportations of illegal immigrants, enacting stricter gun control measures, utilizing gun control measures within Obamacare, sealing presidential records, creating an economic council, creating a domestic policy council, and changing pay grades. Now, for the record, ladies and gentlemen, all of these actions were done unilaterally without congressional authority or permission. And this is clearly indicative of the problem that we have with the White House, which feels it's above the law. There's an article in Washington Free Beacon this morning that says White House seeks to bypass Congress on the Iranian deal. It aims to unilaterally unwind the sanction laws which Congress put in place to bring Iran to the negotiating table in the first place. I mean, you got to be kidding me. It's at this stage in the game, folks, it should be clear to everyone that what we have is a president who's playing for the other team. I mean that seriously and literally. This is like a guy on your football team or a guy on your basketball team who is consistently, willfully fumbling the ball, dropping passes, handing the ball off to the other team. And after a little bit of time, it becomes apparent to anyone that this player has been compromised in some way, that this player's drive and actions and behavior are intended to do one thing: to cause his own team to lose while he improves the chances of the other team, as an inside betrayer. This article goes on to say that the White House has been exploring ways to circumvent Congress and unilaterally lift sanctions on Iran once a final nuclear agreement is reached. Now, we can go over this Iranian issue, but they began implementing it yesterday. The world consensus is that it's a bad idea. The congressional consensus is that it's a bad idea and it's a bad deal for America. The Iranians are declaring that they have cowed and defeated the great Satan. I mean, at what point in time do we have to step back and say, clearly we got to bench this player because he is helping the opposing team to win the game? The sanctions relief issue is one which Congress has all of the say, and the president has virtually none. And yet, he is clearly usurping authority by making declaratory statements and utilizing executive order authority, which he does not have. Mark Kirk, a Republican from Illinois, he's leading this charge on the new sanction legislation. And his comment is that this is completely unacceptable for the White House to make an attempt to bypass Congress in the first place on such a critical global issue. He says, the American people must get a say in any final nuclear agreement with Iran to ensure the mullahs never get the bomb. the administration cannot just ignore U.S. law and lift sanctions unilaterally. Well, with all due respect, I'm calling on Congress. I'm saying, what about this? What about the TPP, the secretly negotiated treaty, which is going to eviscerate sovereignty in the United States of America? What about the TTIP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the other trade partnerships that have been negotiated for the last 5 years in secret, even from Congress? Ladies and gentlemen, what more proof do you need that we are operating at this stage in the game as a tyrannical dictatorship? I mean, it may not be to the stage where we are seeing, him come out in a military uniform and declare himself a unilateral leader. We're not seeing that. But the truth is, because of the way that the United States is designed and structured and the way that our Constitution is developed, he can never do that. But his actions speak exactly of that same mentality, just without the uniform, without the military junta mentality. I mean, he has been eviscerating the military, cleaning out the top generals and the top flag officers who will not acquiesce to his positioning. We've seen unbelievable betrayal along the lines of Benghazi, along the lines of Fast and Furious, along the lines of the issues of where this president has lied to the American people over and over and over. And when we look at what Nat Hentoff is saying, I mean, here you've got a liberal individual who's saying under no uncertain terms, the president has acted so lawlessly that it's become a matter of habit. I would say that never before in our history has a president done these things, said Hentoff. It is true that the president is increasingly using his executive power in the face of staunch Republican opposition in Congress. He changes federal policies on immigration and welfare and appoints officials without congressional approval. So if this isn't a reason for at least the start of an independent investigation that would lead to impeachment, what is? Those are his words, not mine. He's baffled that the scrutiny from Congress is not more obvious. How is it that Bill Clinton faced impeachment for lying about sexcapades, while we have which, I mean, with all due respect, may have called into question his morality, may have called into question his ability to be truthful, may have called into question his integrity, his honor, but not in a way that lives were lost and the nation was economically doomed. But this president, on the other hand, this is completely different, ladies and gentlemen. Here we have men dying, women dying. Here we have 1/6 of our economy being manipulated. Here we have international treaties that will have literally hundreds of years to be implemented. And I'm reading some of the WikiLeaks parts that have been released by them. These are secret negotiations. I mean, you're talking about chapters where, the implications in here are stunningly dangerous for America. Hentoff says Obama doesn't give a damn because he can get away with whatever he wants. Even worse than Woodrow Wilson's regime, when people could be arrested for speaking German. Compounding the problem is the issue of the digital age, according to him, which has allowed the president to engage in unprecedented domestic spying. People forget he taught a course that he was not fully qualified to teach, and nobody seems to care. He's pointing out that as the president of the Harvard Law Review, Obama never published a single article. That went virtually unnoticed when voters were looking at him, vetting him out for the role of president. He says, see, that was a case of affirmative action and people feeling like, hey, we ought to do something important symbolically. And here's a black guy and he's articulate, so we're going to do this. He points out that former U.S. Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, the man that Time magazine once called the most doctrinaire and committed civil libertarian ever to sit on the court, once personally lectured him, Nat Hentoff, that, quote, affirmative action on a racial basis is a total violation of the 14th Amendment. No doubt about it. So Hentoff says, when referring to the Obama presidency, that's what that kind of affirmative action has done for us. What Obama is doing now is about as un-American as you can get. And at the end of his interview, he sums it up by saying, I hope the FBI got all of that. Wow. Wow. Just wow. Think about that. Ladies and gentlemen, no one who is intellectually honest, no one who is looking at this with objective eyes can say this president is not doing the right thing. This president is dangerous to our republic. This president is a clear and present danger to the safety, the security, and the well-being of the United States of America. I recognize the political implications of an impeachment. I recognize that in this partisan world, we're probably unlikely to be successful at that. So that leads us to the next obvious question we must ask ourselves. In a case like this, what do we do? What do we do? Well, the alternatives out there are numerous, and we've heard some of them. We hear about the idea that under the Convention of the States and an Article 5 solution, we can go out and write new constitutional amendments that would rein in the federal government. Well, I have two concerns with that. One, they don't follow the one we have, so what makes us think that if we add one on, they're going to follow that? Two, none of these constitutional amendments will be happening and deployable anytime in the immediate future. I mean, the numbers that they're estimating about when these would become available even for a vote are in 2017, 2018. And if you look at the history of constitutional amendments, they generally have a signing statement that they can become effective within the next either 5 or 7 year window. And most constitutional amendments that have been accomplished in fairly recent history, in the last 100 years, took anywhere between 3 and 5 years before they became ratified. So think about that. It could be until 2017. Let's be conservative and say let's be even more conservative and say that we finally get a constitutional amendment that a convention of the states could put into play by 2016. But then it's going to take us a year or two to get it ratified. And let's be ultra conservative and say, under the best scenario, we can get this ratified in 2 years. That puts us at 2018. With all due respect, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we have until 2018. Now, there's a guy who's a Republican out of the House in Florida. He's a GOP candidate for the Florida House of Representatives. This is a state assembly now. And he's made a statement that he's been visited by the Secret Service because he tweeted on Monday that President Obama should be hanged for treason. He's a black man. His name is Joshua Black. He's 31 years old. He's a Republican candidate for Florida. And he quoted a tweeter saying, "I'm past impeachment. It's time to arrest and hang him high." And Black said, Agreed, and he forwarded the tweet on. Well, he's getting a lot of flack from his own party for that. And in addition to that, he's already been visited by the Secret Service. I guess they're construing that as a legitimate threat against the president. One of the other Republican candidates in the House shot back at him, "You aren't seriously calling for the killing of Obama, are you? I mean, I know you're crazy, but good heavens, you're an embarrassment." Black replied, "Execution is the appropriate punishment for traitors. Don't you have a race? Don't you have a primary?" Well, I got to wonder if, perhaps his point is not well taken. I'm not suggesting that, and I'm certainly not, you Secret Service guys can go back to your dens. I'm not suggesting that the president should be hung. I am suggesting that he should be tried for treason. You've heard me say that many times. And, the truth is, it's time that America began to recognize exactly how far down the slope of collapse into totalitarianism and despotism we have come. His own party's not liking this guy. But you know what? He posted up on his own Facebook page, he says, "To everyone who was offended that I said POTUS should be hanged for treason, this is the man who droned al-Awlaki on suspicion of terrorism, not proof, and later killed his 15-year-old son for nothing more than being his son. This is also the man who sought to have Bradley Manning and Edward Snowden executed for treason when they didn't kill anyone, nor does the U.S. government pretend to believe that they cost any spies their lives. This would be exactly what the president has done to others. And as Jesus said, quote, 'The measure you mete, it shall be meted out against you,' end quote." This is his statement now, not mine. "I make no apologies for saying that the president is not above the people. If ordinary Americans should be executed for treason, so should he. So don't stop at impeachment. Remove him. Try him before a jury, the very right that he arbitrarily denied to al-Awlaki and his 15-year-old son. And upon his sure conviction, execute him. This has been done. Thus has he done. Thus it should be done unto him." That's what Black's commenter statement is. Now, it's interesting whenever, an individual who is on the Republican side, who's a person of color, comes out and talks like this, or talks at all against Obama, the NAACP and the rest of them throw him under the bus for being an Uncle Tom and all the rest of that nonsense. In fact, the NAACP the other day censured one of their own members for actually coming out and saying, that Obama is acting out of malice. I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we're in big trouble here, and it's time that everybody recognize it. And when you've got a politician that's coming out and saying something like that, it's time, folks, for the country to recognize that guys like Nat Hentoff and guys like Black are seeing the truth right in front of their faces. And they're willing to look at it earnestly, sincerely, and honestly. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop at 417-257-1776 on the Square in West Plains, and Wits End Classic Barber Shop. Our friends over at the law offices of Jason Henry at 417-256-4100 for any state or civil criminal cases. Our friends at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Make sure you swing by there for their lunch special, or on Tuesday night, Kids Eat Free for family night. And our friends at the Battery Station, where you can reach them at batterystation.com or 417-257-7799. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a litany of government-sponsored tyranny and treasons. I'm going to just run through a whole bunch of current stories that are out there and wake you up to the reality of how far down the rabbit hole we've slid. You're listening to America's Voice. You can find us on the web by going to americasvoicenow.org. You can join us at patriotfb.com, which is an alternative to Facebook. We'll be right back.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
You're listening to America's Voice Now, where our job is to expose mainstream media propaganda, educate, inform, motivate, and activate patriots across the board. We want to make sure that everybody is understanding of exactly how dangerous things have become here in what used to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. It now is the land of the oppressed and the home of the apathetic. You know, there's a way that you can get good, solid information on a routine basis where alternative media lives, and that's on patriotfb.com. Now, Patriot FB is a Facebook alternative that is by, for, and about patriots. When I say that, the idea is that you can go on there, and there is a radio program there called Patriot Radio. It's news, talk, and music combined. You can capture America's Voice Now being broadcast there on Patriot Radio. You can also capture AVN also streaming there live in the mornings on audio. And then after my program, there's some music that plays. I think they do classic rock music after my program until J.J. McCartney comes on with Conservative Junction Radio. Now, JJ is a guy who's spent 30-some-odd years in the broadcasting business. He's got an outstanding radio show, and I really would like for you to have an opportunity to hear that. Jeff Norton, who is the founder of Patriot FB, he has a program called The Midnight Patriot, and that comes on at 9 p.m. This is all Central, of course, 9 p.m. to 12 midnight. And I got to tell you, if you want to hear a great program, go join and listen to the Midnight Patriot. Jeff's got an outstanding program there, and I'm really impressed with it. I think you will be too. There's also another streaming program called Restoring American Radio, which is WDFP. This is the Cowboy Logic radio program, and it's also a very, very fine radio program that is carried. All of this stuff is available to you on Patriot FB. But even more importantly, guess what? When you join Patriot FB, you are surrounded by people who are of like mind, and you will be amazed. I've seen people sharing all kinds of stuff on there about stuff like ways in which you can utilize and live more self-reliantly, where you can utilize creative concepts to make live off grid or live more reliant or self-reliantly instead of dependent on the government. Cowboy Logic Radio comes on as well, and Donna Fiducia and Don Newen are part of that program. They're also broadcast with us here on Patriot FB. I strongly ask you to go out there and take a look at it. Join Patriot FB. You won't be disappointed. The other thing is the members constantly post up articles and news stories about stuff that you will find valuable. It's not just, AVN, and that's not the only reason to go there. I just think you'll benefit from the experience. So take the time to go out there. It's Patriot FB, like Facebook or FoxtrotBravo.com. And join up, and we'll see you shortly on there. Okay. There have been a series of things that have been happening across the country. And this isn't just related to Obama, but the number of dangerous activities that are happening across the nation and frankly across the world should be ringing alarm bells for everyone about what's happening. You know, I just talked to you before about this Nat Hentoff, and you know, who's calling Obama the most destructive, dangerous president we've ever had. And it's not just this deluge of presidential executive orders, which have no constitutional authority whatsoever, that's leaving a wake of damage. But it's also the question of the lack of congressional will to do something about this. And he's also pointing out and making it very apparent that the media has completely and utterly failed to cover the lawlessness of both the president and Congress. And the public is largely blinded to the unconstitutional actions of the president and Congress, and the courts for that matter. He's 100% right, and I fully agree. Because when we talk about the media, we have to realize that a couple of things are happening. There's an article I posted up on our Facebook page in the Washington Examiner by a Wall Street advisor, and he's making it very clear that the real unemployment number is 37.2%, folks. Did you hear what I just said? 37.2%. And what's happening is the numbers that are, you've heard the term, damned lies and statistics, I think, right? These numbers that the White House and the administration use, and it's not just limited to Obama, Bush did the same thing. These numbers that they use are manipulated and twisted and skewed to present a picture that's not true. Finally, somebody's using real numbers to give the country a true idea of the magnitude of our problems economically. The official numbers are massaged, they're tweaked, they're manipulated to propagandize the public. I would actually like to see the two authors of this article. I'd like to see them take on inflation as their next, true evaluation. What they're saying is that the happy talk that comes out of the White House is a bunch of nonsense. The Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department are manipulating the unemployment rate and the misery index, which they actually claim is much, much higher than the administration claims. They're saying that it's the worst that it's been, ladies and gentlemen, in 40 years. And he's stating in no uncertain terms that the numbers that the administration is pumping out are a flat-out fraud. A flat-out fraud. David John Marotta is the guy who has produced this, and he's calculating the actual unemployment rate is a sky-high 37.2%, not the 6.7% that is advertised by the Federal Reserve. And that the misery index at over 14 is not what's claimed by the government to be their 8%. Now, he's the guy, by the way, who recently told his clients in a memo to them that it would be wise for them to begin to consider the purchase of firearms for what may turn out to be a coming collapse of some sort. And he says flat out that the government isn't honest about how it calculates the people that are in and out of the workforce and the numbers of inflation. Those two numbers are the ones that are combined together to give you the misery index. Now, when it comes to inflation, let's be honest with ourselves for a moment. They tell us that there is no inflation. But I can tell you that the people who are telling us this are also not the ones who go into the grocery store. They've done manipulation of how they calculate inflation by pulling out the two factors that make the greatest impact on inflation numbers. One is the cost of food, and two is the cost of energy. Now, the vast majority of Americans spend a huge percentage of their expendable monthly costs on two things: the fuel to get to and from work, and the cost of fuel to heat and cool their homes. Energy. In addition to that, a significant portion of their income goes towards food. And those two areas alone account for staggering increases, as we've seen. Remember now, and I want to remind you that when the president took over here in 2009, gas was what, $2.50 a gallon or something like that. It's now up to $3 on a good day, and it easily climbs to $3.50. It's climbed as high as almost as $4 in some instances. Yet oil as a commodity is at an all-time, well, it's not an all-time low, but it's certainly lower than when gasoline was hitting those $4 marks. So you got to question. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of market manipulation going on too. But irrespective of how you look at this, when you just take into account the cost of energy and the EPA's demand that coal be removed as a source of electrical generation, Obama's prediction that under my plan, electricity costs will necessarily skyrocket is being brought to fruition. He's making it a prediction that is not prophetic, but guaranteed. We are looking at a staggering amount of inflation in the nation. When you go into the grocery store and you see basic things like chicken, which has, by the way, outpaced beef for the first time in history as the number one meat consumed in the United States, and the price of chicken has grown significantly. It used to be chicken was the poor man's food. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it's not anymore. When you look at what you pay for vegetables and the general groceries that you buy every day, there is absolutely no denying the level of inflation that we are seeing in our economy. The problem that we have here is that we are under a constant onslaught of tyranny and treason from the nation, from our governments in Washington, and I don't want to leave these folks out, your own states. Make no mistake about it. I talked yesterday about Governor Cuomo in New York, that the man should be charged with treason, and he should be. When you openly come out and state that you do not represent anyone within your constituency, and there's no place for them in the state that you are the governor of, who believes in pro-life or pro-gun or anti-gay, ladies and gentlemen, you no longer live in a free state. You now live in a tyrannical police state where a dictator says, if you don't agree with my philosophy, there's no place for you here. We also see it in an example of an article that's out there on Beta Beat, which I'll post in the body of this the comments area so that you can see this story for yourself. And I want you to see it for yourself because this guy walked into a movie theater and he was wearing one of these new Google glasses. Now, I don't like anything about Google. I think they're a dangerous group. I think they are intent on being a corporatocracy tyrant. I believe that they are intent on delivering fascism to the United States because they gain from that. But this guy walked into a movie theater with his wife, and they were watching one of these late-run movies that's out there that's very popular. And the guy posts his full story up on Gadgeteer. But for the benefit of the argument of this of time, he's basically walked in and he's sitting there watching this Jack Ryan movie. And an hour into the movie, federal agents storm in and they grab him out of his seat. First of all, they yank the Google glasses off of his face. And then they pull him and his wife out of the theater and they take them into separate interrogation rooms. Now, here's what the guy says they said to him. They wanted to know who I am, where I live, where I work, how much I make, how many computers I have at home. Why am I recording the movie? Who am I going to give the recording to? Why don't I just give up the guy up the chain? Because they're not interested in me. Over and over and over again. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm describing to you here is the standard mantra that you will hear over and over again from federal agents. the goal of these people is to, first of all, you know what they were claiming? They were claiming, and this was Homeland Security, by the way, they were utilizing this as an argument to say that he was trying to counterfeit copyright this, or make a recording of this movie and then sell it somewhere, right? And we've all seen the ominous FBI warning that comes up in the beginning of the movie. You can be charged and thrown in prison, and we'll kill your firstborn right in front of you, and flay your husband or wife in front of you. Well, I want you to read the article, and I want you to note the dialogue used. And I want you to notice the threats and the methodology that they use. Because what I want you to understand is that, having been through this experience myself, I'm speaking from personal experience. This is the future of America under a domineering, total domination system. And this is what they have envisioned for us. Every little violation that you may commit, whether real or imagined, is subject to interrogation, intensive abuse. The questions that they're asking him and the threats that they're using are a standard method of interrogation by agents. These are agents who live on the dark side. And make no mistake about it, they do live on the dark side. Here's the real problem. They're interrogating him because they believe he's in a conspiracy with someone else. In other words, who am I going to give the recording to? Why don't I just give up the guy up the chain? You see, here's the problem. When you talk conspiracy, they call you a crackpot and tell you you're wearing a tinfoil hat. But here's where the rub comes, America. They live and breathe conspiracy, but only when they're looking at you. In other words, their expectation is that all of us are in a giant conspiracy to defraud their corporate masters in the Motion Picture Association of America and the Recording Industry Association of America of their copyright law. They believe that we are all in a grand conspiracy to commit crime and get away with it. The truth of the matter is, folks, the grand conspiracy is not us. It's them. But they never pause to look in the mirror and see it within themselves. The guy says the agents displayed this level of ridiculousness. They wanted to know where I got the glass and how I came by having it. I told them that I had applied over 1,000 times to get into the Google Explorer program, and that eventually I was selected. And I got the glass directly from Google. I offered to show them the receipt and the Google Glass website if they would allow me to access my or any computer with an internet access connection. Of course, that wasn't an option. Then they wanted to know, what does Google ask of me in exchange for the glass? How much is Google paying me? Who is my boss? And why am I recording the movie? He says that after an hour of intensive interrogation, the agents finally took the Google Glass and they hooked it up to a computer. And all they saw? Family photos. That's it. Family photos. No movie. He wasn't videotaping the movie to sell it. They went through his phone. You know what they found on his phone? Absolutely nothing. He says then everybody felt really bad. And they gave the man and his wife 4 free movie passes. You got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. They made him miss the last half of the movie. They beat the snot out of them emotionally and legally. The author of this article says, based on this strange tale, there are some things we should probably establish. 1, AMC Theaters needs to learn what Google Glass is and set out a policy as to whether patrons can wear it or not. Yes, it may be pretty weird and suspicious that the dude was wearing the Google Glass to the movie. Why would anybody do that if not to film the movie? But having the feds remove a man from his seat mid-movie is pretty stunning. They don't use the word stunning, but I am. When what he's doing isn't expressly prohibited in the first place. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, this was a non-crime in the first place. It was on a suspicion of a crime. Their second point is here, law enforcement officials must make an effort to keep up to date on the latest technological advances so that they don't actually behave unintentionally like dodos. Well, with all due respect, there was nothing unintentional about this. This is standard de rigueur for law enforcement. Their principal mentality is this. You snatch a guy, you claim he's in a conspiracy, you get him to spill the beans on others. I was talking to a guy last night at that National Park Service meeting who was an ex-law enforcement officer on the federal side. And he said to me, you got to recognize, you ever been fishing for bass? Here's what you do, because you're limited to how many you can have. So you catch a bass, and you hold on to him until you catch a bigger bass, and then you throw the first one back. And then you hold on to the next one until you catch a bigger bass, and then you throw him back. You see, the idea is government doesn't have the manpower or, quite frankly, the intellectual capability and the honesty and the integrity to go out and do their own homework and their own investigation. They stick out like sore thumbs. So what they do is they manipulate and intimidate and coerce other people to go out and set other people up for them in an effort to get the government off of their back. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a policy that has been going on in this country for a long, long time. And the truth is, you need to know how it works, because at some point, this pressure is going to come down on you. You and your family. This is not going to be something that you're going to see come and go every once in a while. This is the new police state you live under, and you should be aware of the policies and the tactics they use. When I had my own criminal case and I refused to sign a plea agreement because I said I wasn't guilty of anything, they promised me that if I didn't, they would prosecute my wife. And I said, well, why would you do that? You know that she hasn't had any involvement in this at all, and you know that I haven't done anything. And they said, that doesn't make him, that's not the point. The point is that we're going to make you pay. You see, they're not interested in justice. They're just interested in notching their gun handle. And if it means that they have to destroy you in the process, you're just collateral damage. Whew. All right. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a couple more of these incidents, and then I'm going to ask you a flat-out question. America, what exactly is it that you're waiting for? I mean, when are you going to recognize that tyranny isn't coming? It's already here. It's sitting in your lap. It's occupying your home. It's occupying your business. It's occupying your personal NSA tracking device. America, what exactly are you waiting for? We'll be right back. You're listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us on the web by visiting americasvoicenow.org. Please share these videos and these audio clips with your friends. We need to spread the word. And one of the best ways that you can accomplish that, if you find that I've provided some insight, share. Oh, yeah. You know, we are inundated every day with propaganda and lies and manipulation and abuse. And one of the things that I'd like you to do is to, you know, I take a lot of time and effort to go through these articles that I post up on America's Voice Now, on our Facebook page and our Patriot FB page. And I read these articles every morning. I read them all the way through. I don't just, read the first line. I read them, and then I try to give you an alternative view of what they're saying here. And there was an article that kind of, exemplifies this, in which Bill Gates has come out, and this is an article in Bloomberg, and he says Bill Gates sees almost no poor countries left by 2035. Now, I read the article, and I was stunned by what I saw. Because, and here's what I wrote in my commentary on the story. This is undisguised propaganda. The owed and the uncovered debt of the U.S. alone exceeds the asset value of the planet. And if you add in the derivative risk that taxpayers bear to support our bankster masters, we alone have single-handedly inflated the risk to astronomical proportions. When you realize that the top 1% own the asset value of half the planet, Gates' lie is obviously exposed, no matter what his justifications or his rationale. I take the time to read these articles, and by my comment, I'm asking you to look at the story in a different light. In other words, instead of just reading it and allowing yourself to be influenced by the information, because human beings have a tendency to believe what we see in writing. And you got to recognize that, sometimes it's good to be checked, if you will, before you get too far down the rabbit hole. And so I take the time every morning, as many of you know, I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I go out and I read all of the different articles that I find out there that are newsworthy of the day, certainly as many as I can find in a couple of hours. And I got to read them. And then I've got to find and pick the ones that I think are going to be the most representative of, information that you need to hear, or information that you need to see, but with a twist on why you're reading it. Because I'm a strong advocate of the Socratic concept of critical thinking. You've heard me say this many times. And critical thinking means reading things that you don't necessarily agree with and seeking, while you're reading them, to find the holes, to find the obvious tools of manipulation, to find the propaganda that's integrated and interleaved in it. And oftentimes it's just one sentence or two sentences. And the way in which it's couched is designed to make the reader believe something different than reality. So I try to go out there and make sure that I give you an opportunity to recognize where you're being manipulated, or at least call it to your attention, so that when you read this thing, you're going to understand to, look at it from one perspective or another, or at least to make you cognizant enough that you can see the problem yourself. There was an article out this morning on FT.com. Huge cash pile puts recovery in the hands of a few. And the headline is basically that. My point is, and they're talking here about corporations that are stacking up these massive bulging treasure chests, and that they're going to try to decide how to best utilize that money going forward. My point is, this is corporatocracy at work, and this is what I wrote. Here is corporatocracy at work. They pile up cash, they bribe government to do their bidding, and to then implement laws which strangle free market principles and create and favor niche monopolies, hopefully that they're at the center of. The government officials of state and federal governments then take the money, and then they use government's police power to enforce the withering dictates on the citizenry themselves and the consumer. Ergo, fascism. Boom. That's all there is to it, folks. When you sit there and you have corporations that buy and sell our legislators, and the administrative agencies and the myriad of bureaucrats that control everything about our economy, everything about our liberty, everything about our freedom, everything that you read and see and hear and taste and smell and feel, every thought that you have is being nudged and pushed and molded and manipulated. It's all funded by the corporate entities who seek to control you using and buying the purchase power of a mercenary force called government. Government, George Washington told us, is only force. It is not willful persuasion. It is force, nothing more and nothing less. When you understand that government can only exude force, then you recognize that when corporations are buying government mandates, in other words, the Obamacare health law, let's use that as a perfect example. The insurance companies are all about this. Why? Why were they so wholeheartedly into the whole idea of Obamacare? Well, it's fairly simple. They know and recognized early on that, one, this was going to be a boon to them because it was going to bring them, the quote, 30 million people who had never really participated before in the insurance scam. And then to make matters even better, they got government to create a system whereby in the event that they don't make enough money, government will step in and bail them out at taxpayer cost and expense. And if you don't think that there's bailouts coming for the health insurance companies, do yourself a favor and go out there and learn a little bit. I've posted stories up about it before, and I've talked about it before. There is a bailout coming for insurance that is going for Obamacare, losses that is going to make the TARP bailouts look like a free lunch. What's happening is these corporations in the corporatocracy of fascism essentially have hired mercenaries of government to do their bidding. And those mercenaries accomplish one task. They force government, or they force government's power to be used for the benefit of the agenda of their corporate masters, or their payees. Their payors, I should say, because the government is the payee. When you have that scenario, you have fascism. You have fascism. In fact, Mussolini was quoted as saying that fascism is capitalism in decline. In other words, as capitalism and the free market system become corrupted by corporations who are purchasing government and hiring government as a mercenary force to do their bidding in a war against the American people, you pretty much have everything that you need to know. Now, I posted another story up here and this one is from The Guardian. And it's a story about China and how these people in China, the ultra wealthy over there, who are for all intents and purposes mainly either government or they've purchased their government, China's princelings are storing riches in offshore Caribbean havens. Well, I took the time to read the article, and my comment was, in the immortal words of George Orwell, quote, "Some animals are more equal than other animals." Have a look at what the pigs do in the real world. Orwell was prophetic, just like Ayn Rand. If you want to see your future as this reign of government-sponsored terrorism continues unabated, go back and read what was required reading when I was in school. They don't even have these books in the school library anymore. I wonder why. You see, I'm reminded of that article that I talked about 2 days ago by Ullman, in which he said that an extraordinary crisis must occur because the internet has become a source of information whereby non-state actors, and he references Snowden as an example, and the guy from Bradley Manning and the guy from WikiLeaks and those types of people, are actually awakening individuals to the true danger and the nature of what is happening in our world, not just in the United States, but in the world in general. And that it is ruining the plans of the carefully planned and manipulated plans of the New World Order to bring that about. They're angry about it. You know why? They're like the slaveholders of old. And a lot of people don't realize this, but slaveholders made it a crime for slaves to read or be taught to read and to own or possess any kind of a defensive weapon like a firearm. Why is that? Well, because they knew from personal experience that a slave who became a reader was able to rise above his own immediate circumstance because he was able to now utilize critical thinking skills, could ascertain that, one, he was living in a situation that was untenable, two, that he then had an obligation to do something about it, and three, had the intelligence, the wherewithal, and the fortitude to maybe, and the creativity to go out there and accomplish the goal of changing his particular or her particular situation. We saw the same thing in the Dark Ages, where the church kept people in the dark, and the only interpretation of religious books and documents came from a small religious order that, for all intents and purposes, interpreted what you heard and saw, what was in the Bible, so that you weren't allowed to think and intelligently make your own determinations about that, because it's a measure, ladies and gentlemen, of control. If you keep people ignorant, then you are easily or more easily able to manipulate them, to influence their decision making, to herd them about, to funnel them like cattle into a chute. And these people are upset about the fact that some of us are exposing the truth. Now, I'm the first to admit there's tons of people that are still asleep. But you got to wonder why these people are so upset when we start to see and explain what's really happening. The truth is, like the slaveholders of old, they don't dare allow us to become intellectually aware. Why do you think Common Core is being instituted in our school systems? Well, for the very simple reason that if they do not institute Common Core, they cannot drum your children into being mindless automatons for the consumer nation or the consumer planet that people like Bill Gates and his ilk have envisioned for us. They constantly utilize techniques and games and different ploys to achieve their ends. One of the ways in which they do that is by redefining language. And you've heard me utilize this position before, and the reason it's so important for you to understand is, and I'm going to give you a perfect example of it. When you redefine language, then and you're the one who then makes the definition at a later date or redefines a word to incorporate a meaning that in the ordinary use of the word does not hold water to the average person, then you can utilize any manner of manipulative language to accomplish your task. And we see this over and over and over again. There's a headline out there, and this is from the Department of Homeland Security. It's on the Weekly Standard, and the DHS comes out and says, "We effectively and sensibly enforce our nation's immigration laws." Now let's just analyze that for a moment. We effectively and sensibly enforce our nation's immigration laws. And this was the comment that I wrote in the posting on Facebook and Patriot FB and all the other America's Voice Now. "Methinks thou dost protesteth too much." Why would I say that? Well, if they really wanted to convince us of their motive and their action, a simple, we enforce the nation's immigration laws, would have been sufficient. But instead, they quantify it with superfluous and garrulous dialogue that actually hides the real intent of their statement. And our illegal immigrant in chief means and takes it to give it whole new meaning. Why? Well, have you noticed the two words that they used? The two verbs they used? Effectively and sensibly. So let's just take that for a moment. They can't simply say, we enforce the nation's immigration laws, because they don't. So they say it in a way that will qualify it with the term effectively and sensibly. These are words that can be manipulated through definition. What do I mean by that? What exactly is effectively mean? It's a subjective term, not an objective statement. In other words, you may consider it effective, and she may not. You can say, well, we determine this to be effective, that only 80% of the illegal aliens get through. So suddenly we have, and we are effectively enforcing our nation's immigration laws. We're effectively making sure that we catch the top 20%. Of course, that means that they're neglecting to mention that 80% get through. Next, they inject the word sensibly. Well, let me ask you let me just pose this point. What one person may consider sensible, another person may consider treason. I say that because the president constantly uses that word sensibly. And he says, we need sensible gun control. And I say the Second Amendment calls you a treasonous traitor, Mr. President. The Second Amendment doesn't say anything about sensible gun control that can be defined any way that you choose for it to be defined. The Second Amendment doesn't say sensible, which can be defined to mean virtually anything to anyone. The Second Amendment is very clear. Shall not be infringed. Doesn't say shall not be sensibly infringed. Does not say shall not be infringed in a minorly effective way. You see, our president calls for sensible gun control, sensible immigration policy. And when they utilize a term like we effectively and sensibly enforce our nation's immigration laws, this is DHS's statement. The truth of the matter is, when you hear a politician interject these types of adjectives, you know right off the bat that the word propaganda should pop up right in front of you. That word should it should immediately pop to your mind. You are being manipulated because they're throwing key words in that your mind, unless you're aware and cognizant, doesn't recognize. It's like subliminal advertising. We're laden with it. I talked to you this morning earlier about the Ozark Riverways and the National Park Service and how they've created a 535-page plan that says absolutely nothing. It's 400 pages of gray nonsense, later to be redefined and effectively and sensibly enforced. What is going to be effectively and sensibly enforced? We don't know that. What was effective and sensibly enforced about Obamacare? Well, it started out to be a 2,000-page bill that was full of nuance and gray areas, vagaries. Now we know exactly what it means. It means that we have 20,000 pages worth of rules and regulations that are absolutely dangerous and detrimental to our nation. That our government has, for all intents and purposes, seized 1/6 of our economy. That our president and our Congress had to lie to us blatantly and openly with full knowledge and malice aforethought. And now that it's passed, they say, but this is the law of the land. There is no law when everything is subjective. There is only law when things are objective. A president who says, I can determine who I'm going to prosecute based on prosecutorial discretion as to whether or not you're an illegal alien. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a rule of law in that case. What we have is utter lawlessness. And what we have is whim of whomever is in power. And whether it's this particular illegal immigrant in chief, or whether it's Hillary Clinton in 2016, or whether it's some unknown, unnamed other politician from either party who's been betraying us for decades now. The truth of the matter is, we are either going to make a determination that our nation is ours and that we can choose to limit these tyrants by force if necessary, or we're going to allow them to effectively and sensibly enslave us. I would like to thank our friends and our sponsors at the battery station. You know, Kevin's a friend of mine. If you're interested in the co-op food program that we do there, you can buy bulk food at co-op wholesale pricing by simply going over to the battery station. We can't do this over the phone, and we can't do it on a shipping basis. So you have to be local, and you know, if you're in the 99.3 Big Country 99 listening area and you get to West Plains, slip into the battery station at 303 Washington Avenue and make sure that you say, I'd like Mike Evans from America's Voice Now told me about this co-op program. I'd like to see the catalog. They'll hand you a catalog. You can order 50-pound bags of oatmeal, grain, rice, wheat, whatever you want. 25-pound bags, salt, sugar, brown sugar, any kind of cooking materials. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of products for you that are available. Kevin doesn't make a single penny on it. He does it completely as a public service. I can't applaud that enough. I'm touched every time I think about it. And it's only open and available to our listeners. So, if you're not taking advantage of the program, you're taking all the hard work that I did and all the sacrifice that Kevin makes, and you're wasting it. I mean, we did our part. Now it's up to you to take advantage of it. The orders are placed about once a month. You go in there, you fill out your order, you hand in the order. If it's a really large one, he may ask you for some nominal deposit just to make sure that you're going to show up. And at the end of the day, when it's all complete and your order comes in, you get a phone call and you're expected to go down there and pick it up pronto mondo because he doesn't have the room to store it. You can find out by going to 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains. You can call them at 417-257-7799 for directions. Or you can go onto their website, and there's no information about the co-op on the website, so stop. You can go to the website for batterystation.com. Please make sure that you visit Jason Henry and his law offices at number 10 Court Square in West Plains, 417-256-4100, for all your criminal and civil legal needs, including divorce and custody issues, civil issues like automobile accidents, and then federal and state criminal actions as well. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard for a lunch special that works every day from 11 to 2. Visit our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco at 417-257-1776 at number 2 Court Square in West Plains. And while you're there, go in and tell Jason you're happy he supports us and you'd like to get a haircut from Wits End Classic Barbershop. Thanks for joining with us here on America's Voice Now. You can find us every day at americasvoicenow.org, facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Have a great day.